Some nights seem ordinary until fate decides otherwise. Nights when a single moment of compassion can rewrite a person's entire destiny. For Marcus Hale, this was that night. Marcus Hale had seen desperate people before, but he had never seen a man collapse on his doorstep, thin as bone, shaking like a dying engine, while whispering the last words Marcus ever expected to hear. "Please don't let me die out here." But he never imagined the man shivering at his doorstep that night would return days later in a suit worth more than Marcus's entire restaurant, with the power to change his fate forever. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories just like this one. Your support helps us continue creating inspiring content every day. The night had been painfully still before everything changed. Marcus Hale stood alone in the dim interior of his restaurant, listening to the hum of a refrigerator that was older than he was and the ticking of the wall clock that reminded him every minute how close he was to losing everything he'd built. The dining room was empty, as it had been most nights that month, and the few tables that remained carried the scuffs of years of service. He wiped down the counter, out of habit more than necessity, trying to quiet the anxious rhythm hammering in his chest. Bills piled high in the office drawer, each one another reminder of how fragile survival had become. Yet even with the weight of his struggles pressing at him, he still held onto the belief that kindness mattered, even when life didn't seem to reward it. What he didn't realize was how close he was to the moment that would test that belief, how fate, already moving in the cold outside, was about to call on him in a way he'd never experienced. As Marcus stepped out back to take the trash into the alleyway, he expected nothing more than the same lonely silence he'd grown used to. Instead, he found a human life collapsing at his feet. When Marcus turned the corner, he stopped so abruptly that the garbage bag slipped from his hand. There, hunched against the wall beside the restaurant's back door, was a man who looked as though the world had chewed him up and spit out the pieces. His limbs were curled inward as if trying to protect what little warmth remained, and his chest heaved with devastating weakness. Marcus's breath hitched as he stepped closer, his instincts demanding he act even though fear and confusion tangled inside him. The man's face was hollow, cheeks sunken, eyes barely open. Dirt streaked the collar of his shirt, and his hands shook uncontrollably. For a moment, Marcus wondered if he was too late, if the man had already slipped beyond saving, and a cold panic crawled up his spine. Then the stranger's lips parted, and a voice no louder than a dying ember whispered the plea that would haunt Marcus forever. "Please, don't let me die out here." It was not just desperation. It was surrender, and Marcus could not turn away. He knelt beside the man, sliding his arms under his frail body, shocked by how light he was, too light for a grown man, like his bones were made of paper. The cold clung to the stranger's skin as if trying to claim him entirely. Marcus swallowed hard, steadying himself, and lifted him with a gentleness he didn't know he still possessed. The restaurant door slammed shut behind them as he carried the man inside, the warmth enveloping them in a small but vital promise of safety. Marcus laid him carefully in a booth near the heater, grabbing blankets from a storage cabinet and wrapping them around the stranger's trembling form. The man's breathing remained shallow, but the warmth slowly softened the rigidity in his muscles. Marcus hurried to the kitchen, filling a pot with water and lighting the stove, the familiar click of the burner grounding his shaking nerves. He prepared soup, simple, warm, comforting, hoping it would do more than simply fill the man's stomach. When he returned, the stranger's eyelids fluttered, and for the first time Marcus saw something flicker inside them. Life, stubborn and aching, refusing to let go. He spoon-fed him gently, moment by moment pulling him back from the edge. As the hours passed, the storm outside quieted, leaving the restaurant wrapped in a cocoon of stillness. Marcus stayed by the man's side, watching over him as exhaustion tugged at his own eyes. The stranger drifted in and out of sleep, each shallow breath gradually growing steadier. Marcus didn't ask questions, not yet. He knew enough to understand that survival came before answers. But with each passing minute, curiosity swelled inside him. Who was this man? How had he ended up at Marcus's back door instead of any other street in the city? And why, beneath the grime and bruises, did he carry an aura of someone who had not always been lost? Marcus studied the man's features, tracing faint signs of a life once lived differently, a life with structure, purpose, maybe even elegance. The thought unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. Something about this stranger felt unfinished, like a book opened in the middle without explanation. And even though he didn't yet know it, Marcus had just stepped into the story's first chapter. Marcus had no way of knowing that the same man, now wrapped in blankets, too weak to sit upright, would return days later transformed, clean-shaven, standing tall, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. No way of knowing that inside that fragile body was someone with influence, resources, and a personal history heavy enough to change lives. And absolutely no way of knowing that helping him tonight would draw Marcus into a path filled with challenges, revelations, and choices he had never imagined facing. But fate rarely announces itself in loud, dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a stranger whispering for one last chance. Marcus sighed softly, adjusting the blanket around the man one more time before sitting back with tired eyes. He didn't yet understand why helping this stranger felt different from every act of kindness he'd offered before. All he knew was that something had begun the moment he chose to save him, something irreversible. And as dawn crept toward the restaurant windows, Marcus felt the first subtle shift of a future he didn't know was already on its way. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, casting pale bars of gold across the restaurant floor as Marcus rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He hadn't meant to drift off, but exhaustion had finally claimed him sometime near dawn. The stranger still lay curled beneath the blankets, breathing steadily now, fragile but alive. As Marcus stood and stretched the stiffness from his back, he felt a mixture of relief and wonder. He had spent the whole night worrying the man might slip away while he wasn't looking, but fate seemed to have granted them both a brief reprieve. Marcus brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air, grounding him in the simple routines he trusted. Yet the atmosphere felt different somehow, as if the restaurant itself sensed a story unfolding inside its walls. As he carried a mug back to the booth, he couldn't help but study the man again, trying to read the hints of a life hidden beneath layers of struggle. Who was he before the world reduced him to this? Marcus didn't know, but he was determined to find out, gently, patiently, without pushing. For now, the stranger needed safety. Answers could wait until the man was strong enough to give them. It wasn't long before the stranger stirred, his eyelids fluttering like they were fighting against years of exhaustion. When he finally managed to lift his gaze, confusion clouded his expression. Confusion, fear, and something that looked almost like shame. Marcus offered a steady smile, pulling up a chair beside the booth. "You're safe," he said softly, unsure whether the reassurance would mean anything to him. The man swallowed weakly, his throat too dry for words. So Marcus handed him a small glass of water, guiding his trembling hand. Every movement seemed to strain the man's body, but he drank slowly until his breathing steadied again. When he finally found his voice, it cracked like brittle wood. "Why did you help me?" Marcus hesitated at the question, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't sure how to explain the instinct that had driven him. "Because you needed it," he replied simply, "and because no one deserves to die alone outside." The man blinked hard, his eyes glistening with something unspoken, gratitude tangled with disbelief. He opened his mouth again, as though ready to share more, but the weight of his exhaustion pulled him back into silence. Marcus didn't press him. Instead, he returned to the kitchen to prepare something more substantial than soup, a simple breakfast plate, warm and gentle on the stomach. As he cooked, he couldn't shake the strange heaviness that had settled in his chest. Not dread, exactly. Not fear. Something else. Something that whispered there was more to this man's presence than misfortune or hunger. When Marcus returned to the booth with the plate, he found the stranger staring at his own hands, as if he barely recognized them. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently, setting the plate down. The man hesitated. Too long, Marcus noticed, before murmuring, "Evan." It sounded like the truth, but carried the heaviness of someone who hadn't spoken his own name in far too long. Marcus smiled, offering him the plate. "Eat what you can, Evan." Evan's fingers shook as he picked up the fork, but he forced himself through one bite, then another. Watching him struggle stirred something deep in Marcus. A protective instinct mixed with a growing curiosity about the life Evan had left behind. People didn't end up in this state overnight. Something had driven him here, something intense, painful, maybe dangerous. Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to know the full story, but he knew fate didn't bring people together without reason. After breakfast, Evan leaned back, exhaustion tugging at his features again, but color had returned to his face. "I didn't expect kindness," he whispered, not looking at Marcus. "Not anymore." The admission was soft, but it carried the weight of years. Years of disappointment, betrayal, or perhaps something even darker. Marcus sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. "People surprise you," he said gently. "Sometimes in ways that hurt, sometimes in ways that help." Evan let out a trembling exhale, nodding faintly. His eyes wandered around the restaurant. The chipped paint, the mismatched tables, the quiet warmth of a place that had clearly known struggle but refused to give up. "This place," Evan murmured, "it feels honest." The comment startled Marcus with its accuracy. The restaurant was worn, imperfect, barely surviving, but it was built on sincerity. And somehow, Evan sensed that. As the morning sun brightened the room, Marcus felt the first threads of an unexpected connection forming between them. Fragile but real. He didn't know what Evan would reveal when he was ready, but he sensed the truth would change everything. Maybe for both of them. By late morning, Evan managed to stand with Marcus's help, though his legs trembled with every step. Marcus guided him to a small cot he kept in the storage room for late nights, insisting he rest somewhere more comfortable than a booth. Evan didn't argue. He lay down, pulling the blanket close, his breathing finally calm. "You saved my life," he murmured, his voice fading. "I won't forget that." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Evan had already slipped into sleep. There was something unsettling about the way he said it. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that hinted at debts, promises, consequences Marcus couldn't yet understand. As he watched Evan sleep, Marcus felt a strange weight settle across his shoulders. He didn't regret helping him, not for a moment, but something deep in his gut whispered that this act of compassion was going to ripple far beyond this quiet restaurant. Evan wasn't just a lost soul. He was a turning point, a beginning, and though Marcus didn't yet know it, forces outside these walls were already moving. Forces connected to Evan, searching for him, missing him, or perhaps hunting him. Marcus had stepped into the middle of a storm he couldn't yet see, and the first winds were only beginning to blow. The afternoon passed in uneasy quiet, the kind that settles over a place when fate is holding its breath. Marcus tried to focus on work, washing dishes, wiping tables, checking the pantry, but every task felt distant, muted beneath the constant thought of the man sleeping in the back room. Evan's presence was like a shadow stretching across the restaurant, not heavy or ominous, but charged, as though life had quietly shifted its course overnight. Marcus wondered what kind of hell a person had to endure to end up collapsing in the rain with nothing but a whispered plea for survival. The question gnawed at him, tugged at the edges of his mind, but he pushed it aside. Evan needed safety, not interrogation. Still, as Marcus stood near the window and watched the street outside, he couldn't help feeling a strange prickle of awareness, like someone unseen was watching the restaurant. Cars passed. People walked by. Everything looked normal, yet the sense of being observed refused to fade. He tried to shake it off, but the unease followed him back inside, clinging to him like the damp air of the storm that had nearly taken Evan's life. Something was coming. Marcus didn't know what, but he could feel its footsteps drawing nearer. By mid-afternoon, Evan stirred awake, his voice calling weakly for water. Marcus hurried to the cot, relieved to find him lucid and sitting upright. "You look better," Marcus said, handing him a glass. Evan took it with both hands, as though afraid he might drop it. He drank slowly, then breathed out with a heaviness that seemed older than he was. Marcus sat down on a nearby crate, giving him space but staying close enough to offer support. "You can rest here as long as you need," he said softly. Evan nodded, but his eyes drifted away, turning troubled as though he were fighting an internal war. "I don't usually let people help me," he murmured. "It never ends well." Marcus frowned gently. "You're safe here, Evan." Evan's lips twitched into a sad smile. "Safety isn't something that lasts for me." For a moment, silence stretched between them, tense, fragile, filled with meaning Marcus couldn't yet decipher. He wanted to ask what Evan meant, wanted to know what kind of life bred this kind of dread. But the fear in Evan's expression stopped him. Trust wasn't something he could demand. It had to be given slowly, carefully, and Evan looked like someone who'd been taught. Harshly, that trust was dangerous. Eventually, Evan asked if he could sit in the main dining area, just to feel like he wasn't hiding. Marcus agreed, helping him walk out carefully. Though Evan's movements were steadier, they still carried the weight of someone recovering from more than hunger, someone carrying invisible bruises on the inside. Evan settled into a booth near the window, where sunlight warmed the edge of the table. Marcus returned to work behind the counter, but he kept a quiet eye on him. At first, the restaurant remained quiet, but soon two regulars stepped inside, shaking off the cold. They nodded at Marcus, then glanced toward Evan. A stranger, a vagrant, someone they didn't recognize. Marcus saw the judgment in their eyes before they even opened their mouths. "You picking up strays now, Marcus?" one said with a smirk. The other whispered something under his breath, something sharp enough that Evan stiffened. Marcus turned, irritation piercing through his calm. "He's a guest," he said firmly. "Show some respect." The men exchanged looks, surprised by Marcus's tone, but they backed off. Evan lowered his gaze to his hands, shoulders tight with discomfort. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he murmured as the regulars took their seats farther away. Marcus shook his head. "They're the problem, not you." But even as he said it, he noticed Evan's fingers trembling again. A few minutes later, Marcus noticed Evan staring out the window with unsettling focus. His posture changed, stiff, alert, almost hunted. Marcus followed his gaze, but saw nothing more than a dark sedan idling across the street. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. But Evan's breathing quickened, and color drained from his face. "Evan," Marcus asked carefully. No response. Evan's eyes locked onto the car, like it was a ghost from a past that refused to die. His hand clutched the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. "They found me," he whispered, the words trembling with fear. Marcus's heart kicked. "Ooh." Evan swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "People I can't go back to. People who don't leave loose ends." Marcus looked again at the sedan. The windows were tinted, the engine still running. But no one got out. No one moved. Just the quiet purr of an unseen threat. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, his protective instincts flaring. "You're safe here," he said, though even he heard the uncertainty in his tone. Evan shook his head desperately. "No, Marcus, you don't understand. If they saw me come here, if they think I talked." His voice broke, terror gripping him like a vice. And in that moment, Marcus understood one thing with absolute clarity. Evan's past wasn't just painful. It was dangerous, and it had followed him here. Marcus stood frozen, staring at Evan as the weight of those trembling words sank into the quiet of the restaurant. "People who don't leave loose ends." The phrase echoed like a chilling warning, carving tension through the air. Marcus glanced again at the idling sedan. Still no movement. Still no sign of who was inside. Yet the threat felt real, alive, pressing against the glass windows like an unseen predator. Evan's breathing grew quick and uneven, his body shrinking into the corner of the booth as if trying to make himself invisible. Marcus moved closer, lowering his voice. "Evan, listen to me. You're not alone. Whatever this is, you're safe as long as you're here." Evan shook his head violently. "You don't know what they're capable of." Marcus didn't, but he knew fear when he saw it, and Evan was drowning in it. The kind of fear born from scars nobody could see. The kind of fear that meant someone had tried to own him, break him, erase him. Marcus felt anger ignite in his chest. Not at Evan, but at whoever had put that terror in his eyes. He straightened, jaw clenched. If someone's watching, then we're not running. We're finding out who they are. Evan's eyes widened in panic, but Marcus was already moving toward the front door. Marcus stepped outside, the cold biting sharply at his skin as he walked toward the sedan. His heart hammered, but he refused to show hesitation. If someone was threatening Evan, he needed to know who or what they were facing. The sedan's tinted window rolled down an inch, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the glass. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, try to keep his voice steady. Silence answered him, thick and unnerving. Then, slowly, the car window rolled down further, revealing a middle-aged woman in a charcoal coat. Her expression was unreadable, calm, composed, almost detached. But her eyes were sharp, evaluating him with unsettling precision. "You're Marcus Hale," she said, not asked. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "A concerned party." "About what?" Marcus pressed. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips, but it never reached her eyes. "About the man you brought inside last night." Marcus's breath caught. "Why? What do you want with him?" The woman leaned forward, her voice lowering into something cold. "To ensure he doesn't cause any more complications." Marcus's hands curled into fists, fury rushing up his spine. "He's not a problem," he snapped. "He's a human being who needed help." The woman gave a soft, almost sympathetic exhale. "That's where you're wrong." Before Marcus could respond, the sedan's window rolled up, and the car pulled away without another word, leaving a trail of exhaust and dread behind. Marcus stood on the curb long after the sedan disappeared down the street, his breath fogging in the cold air. His pulse raced faster with every second he replayed the encounter. The woman's composed demeanor, her cryptic phrasing, the way she already knew his name, it all gnawed at him like a warning he couldn't ignore. Whoever she wasn't just watching Evan. She was tracking him, controlling him, hunting him, and she didn't care who got in the way. Marcus returned inside, the door's bell jingling softly, but even that familiar sound felt different now, more urgent. Evan looked up from the booth, still pale, still trembling. "Was it them?" he whispered. Marcus hesitated before he nodded. Evan's face collapsed into despair. "You shouldn't have talked to them," he said, voice cracking. "Now they know you're involved." Marcus sat across from him. "I was already involved the second I opened that door last night." Evan shut his eyes tightly, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You don't understand. These people, they don't forgive. They don't forget. And they don't stop." Marcus placed a steady hand on the table. "Then tell me who they are." Evan's eyes snapped open in fear. "I can't." "You have to," Marcus insisted. "Not just for you. For both of us." Evan shook his head again, his breath trembling. "If I tell you, you'll be in more danger than I already put you in." His voice dropped to a haunted whisper. "And I don't want anyone else dying because of me." Marcus felt a chill travel through him. Dying? Someone had already died in connection to Evan? For the first time, Marcus realized how deep this ran. How far beyond a simple case of homelessness or desperation. Evan wasn't just running from people with power. He was running from people without limits. The thought forced a knot into Marcus's throat, but he refused to back down. "Evan, listen," he said carefully. "Whatever you're carrying, whatever happened, we'll deal with it. Together." Evan stared at him, disbelief mixing with fear. "Why would you do that?" Marcus didn't have a simple answer. It wasn't logic. It wasn't obligation. It was instinct, human instinct, to protect someone who'd been denied protection for too long. "Because you showed up on my doorstep for a reason," Marcus said. "And I'm not letting fear decide what happens next." Evan's breath hitched, his voice sinking to a soft, shaken whisper. "Marcus, if you stand with me, they'll come after you too." Marcus leaned forward. "Then let them come." Evan stared at him, stunned, tears threatening again. Marcus didn't look away, didn't hesitate. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Trust, fragile but real, began to take root. But the truth hovered like a storm cloud ready to burst. Evan was hiding something far larger, far deadlier than he'd admitted. And before long, Marcus would learn exactly what it was. But by then, there might be no way out. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Even after Evan finally drifted into an exhausted slumber in the spare cot Marcus set up for him, the silence of the apartment felt too tight, too loud, filled with questions that clawed at Marcus's thoughts. He replayed the woman's voice, the cold certainty in her words, the calm cruelty behind her smile. Complications. The word rattled against Marcus's ribs like a loose bolt. Whoever she worked for, they weren't worried about Evan's well-being. They were worried about control. And control like that only came from people who believed they owned every piece of a person, including their fear. Marcus stood by the kitchen window, watching the street below. No sedan, no strangers, no sign of danger. But a feeling crept over him anyway, prickling his skin, whispering that someone else was watching, that someone was waiting for the next move. He looked back at Evan, curled up under the blanket, breathing unevenly, even in sleep. Marcus made a quiet promise under his breath. No one is laying a hand on him. Not while he's here. But deep down, he knew protection was only the beginning. To truly help Evan, he needed to understand what he'd stumbled into, and what Evan was still too afraid to reveal. Morning came slowly, gray light bleeding across the floorboards. Marcus brewed coffee, the bitter smell filling the small apartment as Evan woke with a jolt, panic flashing in his eyes before recognition settled. "It's okay," Marcus said, handing him a mug. "You're safe." Evan wrapped his hands around the warm cup, but his fingers trembled too much for him to drink. "Safe isn't real for me," he whispered. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Then make me understand." Evan swallowed hard, defeat settling in his posture. "It won't change anything." "Maybe not," Marcus said, "but silence definitely won't." Evan stared into the steam rising from the cup, wrestling with something heavy and painful. Finally, he spoke, his voice thin. "The people you saw, they're not just after me. They're after what they think I stole." Marcus felt a chill slide down his spine. "What do they think you stole?" Evan hesitated, his face twisting with fear and guilt. "Information," he whispered. "Something I wasn't supposed to know. Something that could ruin them if it ever got out." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of information?" Evan's eyes met his, haunted, pleading for this not to be real. "The kind that gets people killed." Marcus's breath caught. The room felt smaller suddenly. Darker. Evan looked away, voice cracking. "I didn't steal it," he said, "but they think I did. And they'll keep coming until they have me, or until I disappear." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You're not disappearing. Not on my watch." Evan squeezed his eyes shut, tears slipping out. "Then God help you, Marcus, because they won't stop." Marcus felt the weight of those words land like a stone in his chest, but the fear didn't push him back. It anchored him deeper. If anything, the truth gave shape to the enemy he couldn't see, and that shape was far more dangerous than he expected. Evan stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen like a trapped animal. "You don't understand," he said through clenched teeth. "They're powerful. They have money, connections, people in places you wouldn't believe." Marcus rose to his feet. "I don't care." Evan spun toward him, eyes wide. "You should care. They could ruin your life just for helping me." Marcus stepped closer, voice steady. "My life is mine, not theirs." Evan shook his head violently, spiraling into panic. "They'll crush you. They'll crush your restaurant. They'll turn everything you've built into ashes just to remind you they can." Marcus grabbed his shoulders, not harshly, but firmly enough to stop the spiral. "Evan, look at me." Evan's breathing slowed, shaking. Marcus held his gaze. "You're not alone. Not anymore. Whatever they want, whatever they think you took, we face this together." Evan's face crumpled, a mixture of relief and terror breaking through him. "You don't know what they've already done," he whispered. Marcus gently let go. "Then tell me," he said. "All of it." But Evan only shook his head, retreating into silence once more. A silence made of secrets. A silence that promised everything was about to get worse. Much worse. The rest of the day moved like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, quiet but heavy with the feeling that something was coming. Marcus kept the restaurant open, pretending everything was normal, but his eyes drifted constantly to the front windows, watching shadows stretch across the street. Customers came and went, unaware of the tension coiled inside him. Evan stayed hidden in the small office at the back, too frightened to even step near the door. Every time Marcus checked on him, Evan looked smaller, like the walls themselves were pressing in. Marcus wanted answers, needed them, but he could see the way Evan's shoulders shook, how his gaze darted like prey expecting teeth in the dark. Pushing him now would break him, not help him. Still, Marcus had never felt the weight of another man's danger like this before. Every plate he served, every order he called, his mind replayed the words, the kind that gets people killed. By evening, the tension had sharpened into something colder. Marcus caught sight of a car across the street. Dark, tinted, engine running. No one stepped out. No one rolled down a window. But Marcus felt a presence, watching, measuring. He exhaled slowly. The storm wasn't coming. The storm was already here. When the last customer left, and the restaurant fell silent, Marcus locked the doors and pulled the curtains half shut. The quiet felt unnatural, too still, as if even the air was cautious. He walked to the office, leaning against the doorway. Evan sat curled in the chair, arms wrapped around himself. "They're here, aren't they?" Evan whispered without looking up. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Across the street. They haven't moved. Evan closed his eyes, his breath trembling. "They're waiting." Marcus stepped inside. "For what?" Evan swallowed, voice barely audible. "For me to panic. For me to run. That's how they like it. Fear makes people predictable." Marcus frowned. "Then what do?" Evan's response was a hollow, broken whisper. "They make an example." Silence settled like frost. Marcus crouched beside him. "Listen to me. As long as you're here, they're not touching you." Evan let out a shaky laugh. "You think a locked door changes anything? You think standing up to them makes you a hero?" "Marcus, they don't fight fair. They don't play by rules. They're ghosts with guns and lawyers." Marcus felt a flare of anger, not at Evan, but at the people who'd carved this terror into him. "I'm not abandoning you." Evan met his eyes, pleading. "I'm not worth what they'll do to you." Marcus shook his head. "That's not your choice to make." But before Evan could argue, a sudden knock rattled the front door, sharp, deliberate, and far too confident to be random. Marcus froze. Evan went pale as chalk, and the night shifted from fear to confrontation. The knock echoed through the restaurant like a warning shot. 3 slow, heavy taps that seemed designed to rattle the bones as much as the door. Marcus felt his pulse spike, but he didn't move at first. He stood rooted in place, listening. Another knock came, this time softer, but somehow more threatening. Evan pressed himself against the office wall, shaking so hard the chair beneath him creaked. "Don't answer it," he whispered. "Marcus, please don't." But Marcus knew he couldn't ignore it. Letting fear dictate his movements would give these people exactly what they wanted. He inhaled, steadying himself, then stepped quietly toward the entryway. From behind a curtain, he could see a silhouette, tall, motionless, as if the person had all the time in the world. When Marcus didn't open the door, the figure spoke. "Mr. Hale." The voice was calm, smooth, and chillingly familiar. The same woman from before. A slow dread crawled down Marcus's spine. Evan stiffened, recognizing the voice instantly. Marcus's hand tightened on the doorknob. He cracked the door open just an inch, enough to see her standing under the streetlight, gloved hands folded behind her back, as if this were a polite visit. "Good evening," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." Marcus stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. Not fully, but enough that she couldn't see inside. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," he said. The woman arched a brow. "That isn't how this works." Her gaze drifted over the restaurant facade, assessing, calculating. "You've put yourself in a difficult position." Marcus crossed his arms. "He's safe here." "Safe?" she repeated with a soft laugh. "Mr. Hale, you have no idea what he's involved in." Her tone shifted, still polite, but laced with quiet menace. He has information that belongs to very powerful people. People who do not appreciate being compromised. Marcus kept his expression steady. He told me he didn't steal anything. The woman leaned closer, her voice lowering. It doesn't matter what he did or didn't do. What matters is perception. And right now, the perception is that you're hiding him. Marcus felt the cool press of danger sharpening every word she spoke. What do you want? He asked. She smiled slightly. Cooperation. She gestured toward the door. Bring him out. We take him. You walk away. Your restaurant stays intact. Your life stays quiet. Marcus swallowed the surge of anger rising in his chest. He didn't trust her promises, not when her eyes remained empty and dead. I'm not handing him over, he said. For a moment, her face stilled, the smile fading. That, she replied softly, is a poor decision. She turned as if to leave, then paused. You still have time to fix this. But time is not a luxury we extend for long. With that, she walked back to the black sedan, the door closing with a soft, final thud. The car didn't drive away. It simply waited, watching. Marcus re-entered the restaurant, locking the door behind him. Evan stared at him with hollow fear. What did she say? He whispered. Marcus answered with quiet certainty. They're not leaving. Evan's voice cracked. Then we're out of time. Marcus looked toward the door, jaw tightening. No, they were out of patience, not time. Time was something Marcus was about to take back by force. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Neither did Evan. The sedan outside stayed parked beneath the street lamp like a predator waiting for its prey to step outside. Every now and then, the silhouette of someone inside shifted, a reminder that danger never closed its eyes. Dawn crept slowly over Willow Street, washing the restaurant in pale gold light that felt too calm for the chaos brewing inside. Marcus brewed a pot of coffee just to have something warm to hold while he thought. Evan sat at the counter, elbows on his knees, face buried in his trembling hands. They're going to kill me, he whispered. Marcus shook his head. Not if I stand with you. Evan lifted his face, eyes hollow. You don't understand. People like them don't lose. They make examples. Marcus leaned against the counter beside him. Then let them see an example they've never faced before. Evan stared at him, confused. Marcus's voice carried a steadiness he didn't fully feel. You said you were headed somewhere before they intercepted you. Somewhere safe. Evan nodded weakly. A reporter. One who's willing to expose what they're doing. But I never made it. Marcus set down the mug. Then we finished the trip. Evan's breath stuttered. Marcus, they'll follow us. Marcus nodded once. Good. Let them. The plan came together in whispers, rapid scribbles on napkins, and the kind of shaky courage born only when survival demands it. By the time the sedan's occupants realized Marcus had slipped out the back with Evan beside him, the two were already sprinting down an alleyway, cutting across the empty lot behind the hardware store. Marcus's lungs burned, the cold air slicing through his chest, but he didn't slow down. Evan tripped once, catching himself on Marcus's arm. Just keep going, Marcus urged breathlessly. Behind them, a car door slammed, then another. The sound of boots hitting pavement echoed through the morning quiet. They reached Marcus's old truck, a battered blue pickup that coughed awake when he turned the key. Gravel spat from beneath the tires as Marcus tore out of the alley, speeding down Oak Ridge Avenue. Evan clutched the dashboard, eyes darting to the rear window. They're behind us, he shouted. Marcus didn't look. He could hear the engines gaining. Tell me the address. Evan rattled it off, voice trembling. Marcus took a hard left, the truck fishtailing before straightening out. We're not going to outrun them, Evan said. Marcus smirked slightly, adrenaline sharpening every sense. I'm not trying to outrun them. He took another turn, this time into a crowded farmer's market just opening for the day. Vendors yelled as Marcus weaved through, the black sedan forced to slow or risk plowing into innocent people. Evan stared at him, stunned. Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel. We're going to outsmart them. They lost the sedan long enough to reach a quiet street near the edge of town, a row of brick apartments and shuttered storefronts. Evan stumbled out of the truck, breathless. Up there, he said, pointing to a third-floor window. Marcus nodded, ushering him forward. They climbed the narrow stairwell 2 steps at a time. Evan knocked in a pattern, 3 short taps, 1 long. The door cracked open. A woman with sharp eyes and a notebook in her hand pulled them inside without a word. "You have proof?" she asked Evan. He nodded and handed her a flash drive with trembling fingers. She plugged it in her laptop immediately, scanning through files that made her lips press into a thin line. "This," she whispered, "is enough to bury them." As she began uploading documents to multiple secure servers, Evan sagged with relief for the first time in days. Marcus watched the clock on the stove tick loudly, each second a reminder they weren't safe yet. The reporter finally looked up. "It's done. Even if they kill me, the information is out." Evan covered his face, sobbing quietly. Marcus placed a steady hand on his back. "You're free now," he said softly. But even as the words left his lips, footsteps thundered up the stairs. Heavy, fast, coming straight for them. The door burst open before Marcus could brace it. 2 men in dark suits charged inside, but froze just as quickly. Behind them, the woman who had threatened Marcus stood in the doorway. But her expression had changed. Shock flickered across her face as someone else stepped forward from the hallway behind her. A tall man in a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, collected, eyes sharp. Evan's knees nearly buckled. "Mr. Whitlock," he whispered. Marcus looked between them. "You know him?" Evan nodded shakily. "He's one of the board members." I thought he was with them." Whitlock shook his head slowly. "Some of us want the truth out, Evan. But exposing corruption in our own ranks is dangerous." You disappearing forced their hand. He stepped closer, voice leveling with calm authority. "The information is already spreading. They can't touch you now, and they can't touch him either." His gaze flicked to Marcus. The woman's jaw tightened, rage simmering beneath her controlled exterior. "Stand down," Whitlock ordered. She hesitated only a moment before signaling the men to retreat. For the first time in hours, the air in the apartment felt breathable. Evan wiped his face. "It's over." Whitlock nodded. "It's over." Marcus exhaled deeply, shoulders slumping as adrenaline drained from his body. Evan turned to him, voice trembling. "You saved my life." Marcus shook his head. "You saved your own. I just refused to let fear win." Later that afternoon, when Marcus returned to the restaurant, exhaustion weighed heavily in every muscle, but something else waited for him. Peace. The street was quiet. No cars watching, no shadows lurking, and taped to the front door was an envelope with his name written in elegant script. Marcus tore it open inside, expecting threats, only to freeze. A deed. A bank statement showing his debts wiped clean. A handwritten note from Whitlock himself. "For your courage. For choosing humanity over convenience. Consider this an investment. Not in your restaurant, but in the kind of world we should all be fighting for." Marcus sank into a booth, overwhelmed. Evan arrived a moment later, hesitant, but smiling for the first time since Marcus had met him. "Looks like your kindness paid off," Evan said softly. Marcus chuckled through tired tears. "Funny, isn't it? I thought helping you would ruin me." Evan sat across from him. "It saved us both." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting warm orange light through the diner windows. Marcus looked around at the place he had nearly lost, now filled with a quiet, glowing hope. Tomorrow, he would open the doors again, and whoever walked in, lost, hungry, scared, would find a seat. Because in the end, kindness wasn't just a risk. It was a legacy, and Marcus Hale was determined to keep it alive. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Every bit of support helps us continue creating powerful, emotional stories that remind us why kindness still matters. Stay tuned. More life-changing stories are on the way.